So welcome to today's webinar. It's a virtual panel on taking the leap from a full-time career to a career in freelance. My name is Alexandra Stevens. I want to welcome you all today to this webinar sponsored by the Hiatt Career Center at Brandeis. We're so excited to have you, and we're so excited to have four wonderful panelists joining us from all over the world. So I'm going to introduce them quickly, but you'll be hearing from them themselves as well throughout today's broadcast. So first I'm going to start with Stacy. Stacy is a freelance writer, event planner, blogger, volunteer manager, and educator who has traveled to over 50 of the world's countries. She met her Australian-born husband while on a trip to New Zealand, and she's been writing about adventure, journey, and perspective-changing life shifts ever since. She encourages travelers to take the leap, use the world as their classroom, and get outside of their comfort zones. And maybe this is because she was a former high school teacher of 15 years. She has a master's degree in education and a bachelor's from Brandeis. And she is currently based in San Diego. So welcome, Stacy.
Thank you. Hi.
I'd also like to introduce to you our second alum on the panel, Brandeis alum Sarah Goliger, class of 2012. She's a Boston-based digital marketing consultant and freelancer who works with companies of all sizes to launch, optimize, and scale their online marketing efforts. Prior to starting her own consulting business, Sarah managed the email marketing and paid advertising channels at HubSpot. She is also an instructor at General Assembly, where she teaches workshops on digital marketing. And she is a proud 2012 graduate of Brandeis. So welcome, Sarah.
Thanks, Alexandra. Hi, everyone. Excited to be here today.
Cool. I'd also like to introduce Mitra Kaboli. She's an award-winning audio producer, editor, and sound designer who's been working professionally in podcasting since 2012, which is before Serial happened, for anyone who couldn't put that together. She's one of the original team members of The Heart, which is a Peabody finalist podcast about intimacy. Her mixing and sound design has been included in ESPN's documentaries, Latino USA, Making Contact, and Death, Sex, and Money, and she is based in Brooklyn. Welcome, Mitra.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Happy to have you. And then last but not least, we have Alice Petway. She's a freelance writer and editor whose work has appeared in prominent print and online journals, magazines, and newspapers. Her chapbook, Barbed Wire and Bedclothes, was published by Spire Press in 2009, and her full-length collection, The Time of Hunger, is available now from Salmon Poetry. Her second book, Moth, is forthcoming from Salmon Poetry in 2019. She's a former Lily Peter Fellow, Raymond L. Barnes Poetry Award winner, and three-time Pushcart Prize nominee. And currently Alice lives and writes in Shanghai. So we have all corners of the globe covered tonight. Welcome.
Hi, everybody, and thanks, Alexandra, for inviting me.
Awesome. So as you can see, we have a wonderful lineup of panelists, all in very different niche areas of the freelance world. And so I'm really excited for them to share their experiences with you today. What we'll be discussing is pretty vast. And like I mentioned, you can submit a Q&A into the Q&A box in your control panel, and we'll get to as many as we can at the end. But here's what we'll be talking about tonight. First is what to consider when you're deciding whether or not to become a freelancer yourself. Best practices for building a client base, setting pricing and knowing your worth, crafting and marketing your pitch, weighing the pros and cons, and answering your questions, talking about some resources as well. So lots to talk about. So without further ado, I'd love for you guys to share your freelance stories. So our first section is, should I stay or should I go? And the question is to all of you, how and when did you personally make the decision to become a freelancer? So Alice, let's start with you.
Well, for me, and I think that this is maybe in particular because I'm a writer, and I've been working professionally as a writer for 15 years, but so it's a little easier for us to start to dip a toe into freelancing. And most of my career, I've freelanced in some form or another while I was also working full-time. So I think when the opportunity came to make that transition, it was maybe a bit easier. And that opportunity came, my husband actually was offered a position in Colombia, in Bogota, and we were looking for a way to get back abroad. And at that point, I felt like I had enough connections and enough experience that I thought, okay, like I've been dabbling at this for 15 years. Let's see how this works full time. And luckily it worked wonderfully. And now I'm, 5 years later and on my third continent freelancing. So here we are.
Awesome. Stacy, how about you?
Kind of the same as Alice mentioned. I've been teaching for 10 years. I went on a trip to New Zealand. I met my husband, and then we had like a 4-year international courtship where we had to travel to see each other because I was in New York and he was in Australia. And we got married, traveled around the world for a year and lived in Australia. So I'd seen a lot of different ways to live and work. I'd been doing event planning, freelancing kind of for years while running 4 clubs and teaching at school. So like Alice mentioned, just dipping that toe in. I started a blog when we were traveling around the world, which was really to just tell my parents that I had all my fingers and toes. And just after that experience, coming back and going back into the classroom, I was in the same role, but I was a different person. And after more traveling in the next couple of years, education was shifting, and I just wanted to do something different in the world. We were looking for a way to maybe be more location independent, be able to travel more or for longer periods of time, and possibly move abroad again at another point in time. And I was looking for a way to maybe not be as kept structured and be able to kind of make that leap. So it was probably about 4 or 5 years ago that I dipped that toe in a little bit further and then left the traditional classroom and to see how it goes and see what that project-based freelance lifestyle would look like for me. And after a couple more moves, here we are.
Wonderful. I think that theme of flexibility is going to permeate our conversation tonight. Sarah, how about you? When did you make the move?
So for me, as Alexandra mentioned, I had been working at HubSpot for a few years on their marketing team, and I was looking for a change. So I moved to a very early stage startup to run their marketing. And it ended up being a really poor fit for a lot of reasons that we won't get into, but I ended up leaving a few months later, and I was just presented with this blank slate. And I was fortunate enough to have a number of job offers presented to me pretty quickly after that, but I sort of took a step back and I thought, working full time again is not my only option here. And I had sort of toyed around with the idea of freelancing for a little while, and this seemed to present the perfect opportunity to try it out. And the timing actually worked nicely because my now fiance had also been working at a startup at the time, and they unfortunately ran out of money the same week that I left my startup. And so we said, why don't we do some traveling? Exactly like you said, very consistent theme. So we went to Southeast Asia for about a month. And when we came back, we said, why don't we both give freelancing a shot? And it ended up thankfully being very successful for both of us.
Awesome. Cool. Mitra, how about you? What's your freelance story?
Well, it wasn't like a choice I made exactly. I kind of entered like the professional work environment at the tail end of the recession. And so work was not particularly abundant. And I didn't realize this because I'd kind of been in this like university bubble, and I had no idea what I was doing. And it was frankly really, really difficult for me to get a job. I was looking for a job, but I couldn't get one. But I was also working on this project, the Heart. And so I kind of slowly via that, because that was kind of my only real, it was the only thing that could be considered part of my portfolio, was this thing that I had kind of been practicing, like the sandbox and the skill that was getting better and better and better because I just kept doing it. And I was working in restaurants, and then I picked up a gig here and a gig there, and then I started temping at WNYC, which was like this huge break, and then I kept doing that, and then I temped at Latino USA, and I was still working on the Heart. And then
Serial happened, and then everybody wanted a podcast. And I was one of a very small group of people who knew how to do it. And so I got like a huge contract with a Condé Nast magazine that was the financial backbone of my freelance career for the last like 2 or 3 years until, you know, they finally decided to take it in-house. And now it's bountiful. And now it's a choice that I make that, you know, I like working on different projects. I like kind of being my own boss, and setting to some degree my own schedule, my own hours and things like that. And frankly, I'm not a morning person, so it works out well for me.
Wonderful. So, I mean, for you, it was, you know, right place, right time. But is there a right time? And so, Sarah and Stacy, I want to come back to you on this. When is the right time? Is there ever a right time? And for those thinking about making this move, what are the considerations that they should be thinking about? And what did you ask yourself? So Sarah, we'll start with you.
Yeah, so I think when you are happy or comfortable in your current role, it's kind of tough to figure out what the right timing is. Like I said, you know, I happened to be in a situation where I was just presented with a blank slate and could sort of take that opportunity to transition. But when you are not in that position, it's a little bit trickier. But I think when you feel like freelancing is a good fit for you, and we can talk more in depth about what things you should be thinking about to make sure that it is. But I really think that making the transition to freelancing doesn't need to be as scary as a lot of people think. You know, we all have this idea ingrained in us that working means commuting in and out and sitting at a desk for 8 hours a day and attending meetings and having performance reviews with your managers and all of that stuff. And we have this sort of stereotypical notion of what that involves and the necessity of that in terms of making a living. But really, there are other options. And I think freelancing is a really great way to sort of break that mold.
Great. Stacy, how about you? Right time, what should the considerations be?
I think like so many things in life, there's never really a right time, and you're never really going to be 100% sure that it's a full-fledged right thing. There's always going to be a bit of a leap. And there are these just varied approaches, like Alice was saying before, there, you know, dip your toe in, totally sell everything and go for the gusto and see what happens. Maybe you have a partner or spouse or somebody else that you can kind of fall back on and lean on. I would just say trust your gut and give it a shot, and try not to live with any regrets. That more, if you've been kicking this idea around for more than a minute and a half and it's been eating at you, you're not going to know until you try. So figure out whatever those worst case scenarios are for you. And if you can live with whatever they are, then, you know, throw the hat in the ring and see what works. And I think there's never really a straight line to get you to where you're going. And as many of us have already said, we're not really sure if we're even there yet. And use zig and use zag. I think be secure in knowing that you have to be flexible. And if you have to go back to full time or take something else along the way that allows you to eat but still fulfill your passion, then do it. But at least you feel like you're more on whatever path you should be on now. I was on a great path for 15 years and I loved what I was doing. And then I kind of saw another way to follow the sun and wear flip-flops more often than I was doing in New York, and being able to kind of pick up and spend more time with family and friends on the other side of the globe for longer periods of time, even though I was really lucky to be able to have that time as a teacher when I got those breaks. I wanted those longer stretches to be able to do it. But I never really felt like it's 100%. I'm still not sure that it's 100% the right thing to do, but I knew that if I didn't give it a shot, I was talking about it. And at some point it was time to just take the leap.
Yep. Sarah, when you and I first chatted, you talked about being well suited for it and asking yourself, are you suited for a life as a freelancer? Because there are lots of, you know, changes that come with working for yourself versus working for a company. You know, you talked about needing to be self-motivated. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think one of the first questions that you want to ask yourself in figuring out if freelancing is going to be a good fit for you is, and this sounds very obvious, but what am I going to offer? What kind of services am I going to be able to offer to clients? And are those skills or services that the market needs? And then you also want to think about, what does your competition look like, right? So for me, I focus heavily on advertising. And that's something that not a lot of other freelancers are doing right now. So most of my competition is actually in the agency world. But when I turn away clients, when I have a full load, I get the question a lot of, oh, well, who else can you recommend who also specializes in this? And it's kind of unfortunate, but I don't have a good answer for them. And it's a plus for me as a freelancer because it means that I don't have a lot of competition. So I think you want to think about, what can I offer that's unique? Or if it's not something that is unique inherently, how can I do it in a unique way? How can I put my own value forward that makes me different from other marketers or other writers or other designers, whatever that might be? And you really want to be able to answer the question, what can you do for me and why should I hire you to do it versus anyone else? So that's sort of the first set of questions. Another big one to think about is, how are you going to find clients? And I don't think that you need to have this fully fleshed out right from the start. That's really hard to do. And it's sort of one of those things that you have to just figure out as you explore different paths. But I do think you should go in having some sense of, okay, who are a few people in my network who I could tap for referrals? What are some ways that I could leverage some online marketing efforts for myself as a freelancer in order to gain visibility, get visible in search results, that sort of thing, and just start thinking through what are some possibilities there. And then the last thing that I would really think about before you make the leap is kind of like what you were saying, Alexandra. Is this work style a good fit for me? And hand in hand with that is also, is this income model a good fit for me? So to give you an example, I have a close friend, a former coworker of mine at HubSpot. She has a very similar skill set as mine, almost exactly the same professional network, and she could never see herself freelancing. She's the type of person who just prefers to have structure in her day and prefers the guarantee of that steady income and the predictable workload. And so if you are the type of person who either financially or just mentally would prefer not to have that fluctuation in income that's really inherent in freelancing, then it might not be a good fit for you. And that's totally fine. Or if you are worried that without a manager to set goals for you, you would find it really hard to set goals for yourself or to stay motivated to get your work done, then it also might not be a good fit for you. And that's totally fine. But these are the kinds of questions that you want to be asking yourself up front to really envision, what would it be like if I were to take on this lifestyle and this work style? Because with freelancing, they sort of go hand in hand.
Right. Thank you. Any other considerations that anyone else wants to add as you're thinking about this as a potential shift?
I would just say that from probably because I was in a profession for a longer period of time, and it was a big jump, that I was going from something that was like Sarah mentioned, that was fully steady, that did have that consistent paycheck, but also came with those healthcare benefits. And maybe because I wasn't somebody right out of college that I was secure that I was either right on my parents' benefits, or I wasn't living in a space that had nationalized healthcare that at least I knew if I broke my finger, somebody would reattach it and fix it, that I wanted to really consider those things. So knowing what works for you, if you can be without health insurance, if you are willing to take on that marketplace, if you have somebody else's to go on, whatever that risk level is for you, that was a really big consideration. And knowing that you have that backup. Whether that's some, money in the bank that, would be your hit by a bus scenario kind of thing. What could you do if something else happened that you weren't thinking about? And I think because I was in something so secure for so long, that was a real consideration for me. And also just that lifestyle switch, more, it's maybe dating myself, but more the difference between Ross and Joey on Friends. And if you can handle that consistency and going to an office, whatever your office looked like, versus making the world your office, wherever it is that's going, that's going to be on a beach, on a boat somewhere. If you can handle that and that structure and make it for yourself, it's also going from a difference of being surrounded by people, perhaps,
Right.
to a life that could possibly be a little bit more solitary and filled with isolation if you allowed it to be, depending on what works for you. So I think other than that, Sarah covered everything that I would have suggested, but and also on top of that, how are your social media marketing skills, which as a teacher, I never had to consider.
Yes.
And in the world today, the internet is everybody's friend, but how can you make that work? And at what level do you need it to work for whatever services you're looking to provide?
Right. It helps when you're a digital marketer to market yourself. Although it always is more challenging when you're marketing yourself versus a product or a service. So we mentioned as one of the considerations, how are you going to find clients? What is that going to look like? So we're going to talk a little bit now about building a client base. So Mitra, I want to start with you because we had an interesting conversation about this and about a referral source that's really helped you along in your own process. So how did you go about building your own client base? You touched on it briefly, that Serial kind of opened up a whole new world of demand for people like you. But what was your most valuable referral source along the way, and how did that work for your story?
I think kind of the way in which I generally manage these types of things is I'm always just kind of checking in with people. When there are industry relevant social events, I kind of make a point to be there. And I think because I've always been working on the heart until very recently, people kind of assume that I wasn't looking for work. And so I have to remind them because the heart wasn't a full-time job. It was more what I spent full-time energy on, but did not feed me by any means. So the way we got in touch is by this woman that I just every once in a while email her and be like, what's on your plate? How are you doing? What's going on? Because I have to think ahead to, right now I'm working on a project and my plate is full, but, in 2 months, 3 months, 6 months, a year, I don't know. I don't know what my next gig is going to be. So just kind of making a point of reminding people that I'm around, I'm available. And, I've been in the industry long enough, and it is a pretty small industry. And there are a lot of freelancers, but I have kind of built a reputation for myself because I worked on kind of a project that has a lot of industry cachet, I guess I'll say. It wasn't monetarily successful, but people in the industry know what it is and they respect it and they understand the kind of work that went into that and that kind of value. And so that kind of transcends onto me as well.
Great. Cool. So, obviously before you can get clients, you need to build credibility. And you talked about that, Mitra, just now, of having a project that had a lot of clout for people in your industry, even if it didn't necessarily pay the dividends financially. But so, Stacy, we talked about this a bit, how do you build credibility and experience without giving away your services for free? Because I think it can be easy for people to do that and undercut themselves, especially when they're first starting out.
Absolutely. And I think it's hard, especially if you come from something else where someone else determined what your salary was going to be. Now, all of a sudden you're thinking, what's my worth in the financial sense? And it probably goes back to some of the things that Sarah touched on of, can you do this lifestyle? Meaning, how much do you need to live or to cover your expenses? Or are you looking to make a profit? Or can you just put food in your mouth and take care of yourself? So I think you have to consider all of those things. And if you're willing to put yourself out there, meaning I lived in New York, all of my event services and clients, I had 2,000 kids plus all of their families, and I worked every summer with 600 kids. So as they aged, they all knew what I was capable of doing. Every school event did. So all of my vendors and connections in New York event-wise, I had. And then I moved to San Diego. So I had to start from scratch again in that sense. And my writing clients as well, that's an online situation. You're kind of able to kind of build your brand in an amorphous way where you don't necessarily have to have this FaceTime with people as long as you can show what you can prove. But I was willing in the beginning to take those bylines for those credits because I didn't have anything in that sense. I had years and years of educational work and all sorts of things to back me up and degrees, but I didn't have anything in that line of work. So in the beginning, I was willing to take certain projects that I felt were really worthwhile or would give me that either that byline and that credibility, but would also connect me with people that in the future I might want to have as my editor, or I might build a connection and a relationship with that might then take me further in the financial sense that would pay for me to eat. And the same sense event-wise, now that I was in San Diego and if I wanted to do local events, aside from consulting on whatever they were, wherever they were in the world, I looked into organizations that I felt strongly about, that if I was willing to volunteer and be on a committee, this was the service that I could provide. And either interacting with people who, again, would later perhaps become my clients or maybe connect me with people who were willing to pay for my services. But I had to get my foot in the door somehow. I was literally making a leap from a traditional educational teacher sense. And I had to convince people to see that how those services translated and how all of the things that I did for years before flipped to this new industry. And could they trust me and could they count on me and would I be dedicated and diligent and all of those things? So I was willing to take those free things for a little bit. It's difficult, but I wouldn't have gotten my foot in the door in these new avenues separate and aside from education if I hadn't. And then I think it's important to give yourself a limit of whatever that is and set that goal for yourself. Today, luckily, I don't necessarily seek out things that are not going to pay me for that byline because I've been lucky enough to actually garner some myself. But in the beginning, I was willing to do it, right. But I put those limits on there. And I think that that's important. And everybody's limits are going to be different.
Right. Yeah. A colleague of mine calls that smart volunteering. It's not just giving your stuff away, but it's being strategic about it. What are you going to be getting in return? Whether that's pieces to include in your portfolio or networking connections that could lead to future work down the line.
And sometimes it's actually becomes then volunteering and you make those connections and you're continuing to, willing to actually provide that because it's worth it for that warm fuzzy that you get. And you have those other avenues that you can commit to for the income on in another stream.
And thank you all for volunteering tonight, by the way. This is smart volunteering. You're all meeting each other. So Sarah, we talked a little bit about when we spoke content marketing to allow potential clients to sample what you have to offer. What thoughts do you have about that? And again, about building that brand and credibility in your client base?
Yeah, I think it's a great idea, but you definitely want to be strategic about how you approach it. So the example that I like to give, on my website, I offer a free ebook. You can go and put in your name and download it for free. And it's called A Step-by-Step Guide to Hiring Marketing Freelancers. So if a prospective client comes to my website and they see this and they download the ebook, usually one of two things happens. Either they read it and they disqualify themselves as a good fit to work with me. Let's say they read the section about if your priority is budget over quality, whatever it might be, and they say, okay, I'm not a good fit to work with Sarah, but this gives me some valuable advice for finding somebody who is a good fit for me. Or the other scenario is they read it and they want to work with me, and now by reading this informative guide that I've written, that sort of boosts me up in their minds a little bit, and they say, oh, okay, she had all this great advice about what to look for. She must be fairly qualified to be doing what she does. So that's kind of how I approach it. I also have a good section of my website that's just dedicated to testimonials from previous clients and case studies that I've written about projects that I've done in the past. And this is absolutely content marketing, right? It's taking the content that you have to present as a freelancer about your work, very similar to a portfolio, right? And portfolios don't really work for digital marketers necessarily, but I sort of use the case studies in their place. So I think whether you're a writer, designer, developer, whatever it is, you should absolutely be showcasing the work that you've done in the past in some way, to be able to show to prospective clients and sort of have them get a sample and a sense for what your work is like before they decide to work with you.
Great. So if you all who are listening have more questions about building a client base, please feel free to submit them to the Q&A box. But we are going to move on to a topic near and dear to all of our hearts. Show me the money. So Alice, we've been neglecting you. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. So we kind of started touching on it with the building of the client base, but when you're just getting started, it could be easy to get desperate, undercut yourself, and bargain yourself down to an unsustainable rate. How did you determine what your services were worth and what your price point would be?
Well, I think that I came into this from a really great position in that immediately before going full-time freelance, I was managing a magazine, and I had around 20 freelancers working for me, actually more if you count copy editors and proofreaders. So I knew what I was paying freelancers, and I also knew what I had to pay to get a quality freelancer versus somebody who's maybe a little bit less experienced. So I think that was really valuable information for me, making the switch to the other side of that equation. I also early on found a really lovely article titled appropriately, "How Much Should I Charge?" in some book about freelancing that was incredibly thorough, and in the early days provided a great reference for kind of midline, what's out there, what are people charging? Because you can go out, and these days I feel like you can get on any number of online forums where people are offering their services for an alarmingly low rate, rates that nobody could possibly support themselves on. And sometimes I wonder, I would love to talk to some of those people who are posting those rates, because I wonder if they're doing it on the side, or maybe they're students, or maybe they are people who are new to freelancing and building a reputation. But I think that if you truly want to make it work as a full-time freelancer, it's better to hold out if you can. And like Stacy mentioned, I've been lucky enough to have a spouse that, I knew I wasn't going to starve. But I think if you can afford to, and you have the support to, if you can hold out for the rate that you know is appropriate for your skill level, that's better and will pay off in the long run. Because once you start taking on clients at a rate that doesn't represent your skill, then you're stuck and you're going to be chasing after those appropriate rates for the rest of your career. So that was my experience.
Yeah, and I assume obviously things are so different depending on where your clients are based. Geographically speaking, someone in New York is going to pay a lot more than someone in Ohio, potentially.
Yeah, that is right. And also, again, all freelancers are in a unique situation, but because I work primarily in the social justice world, we're all working because we believe in what we're doing, and some organizations can simply afford to pay more than others, and that's just the reality of doing advocacy work. So I feel like in a way it's a team effort, in that I know that I work with organizations that have the funds to pay me well, and then because they are doing that as part of their work, then I have the flexibility to maybe work with some smaller organizations that are doing good work and I want to collaborate with because I believe in what they're doing, but maybe can't afford to pay me the rate that another more established organization could pay. So it's always kind of a juggling game between what you want to do, what you're passionate about, what needs to get done, and how you can eat at the end of the day.
Yes. Amen to that. So, Mitra, you talked about, getting started in a sector that was just growing and just coming into its own when you started having the skills and building the skills to be a podcaster and sound producer. How did you determine your price point, given that it was a relatively new industry, and as you mentioned, there weren't many of you doing what you were doing?
So it was kind of really interesting, especially at the beginning before, everybody really wanted it. Rates were relatively low, and then they got really, really high, and now they've kind of leveled out. I will ask anyone how much they get paid. Like, I need to know because that kind of disclosure is only harming workers in general. And I think there should be some sort of transparency. And my rates vary. They are based on my clients. One, do they have experience with audio? Do they know what they're getting into? I have to do a lot of educating with clients who are just getting into podcasting. I have to tell them what things cost because they kind of sometimes have unrealistic expectations, or sometimes I can use that to my advantage. If they're used to video rates, then, I can kind of inflate my rate a little bit because they don't really know how much things cost, or what the median rate is. Or on the flip side of that, people are like, oh, this should be super easy, but they have no idea. They hear an episode of a podcast and they're like, yeah, no problem. You can do that, right? It's well, that was a full-time job of 7 people that made this thing that you're listening to. Right. And you're asking me to do that for pennies. So I have to explain to you how this actually works and what this costs. And I'm really upfront about it. I give people estimates. And I'm really, just because you're have less experience, I don't think that means you should undercut yourself or undercut anyone else.
Right. Sounds like an ebook might be in your future of how to hire an audio producer.
Yeah. I feel very strongly that even if you are not as experienced, you're still doing work. So at the end of the day, it is still work. And Alice said, if you start low, you're going to be stuck there. It's going to be hard to bring yourself up to market.
And so how do you tactfully ask people how much they make? How do you go about asking that? Because I agree. I think research is so important, and transparency, it's helping us all.
I'm on several listservs of women who are always just asking what rates, so there's a lot of dialogue around rates. And, I have tons of friends in the industry. I feel comfortable asking them how much they get paid. How much do you get paid? How much are they paying you? Let me know. Am I charging too much? Am I charging too little? I think you should get paid more, but you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I think it's good for everybody.
Great. So there's how much should you get paid? And then there's also how should you get paid? So Sarah, you talked about putting a lot of thought into setting a pricing structure. So whether it's hourly or project-based, monthly retainers, what is your strategy to setting that pricing structure, and what should people be thinking about?
Yeah, so this is a really important concept to be thinking about as you're transitioning into freelancing and also throughout your entire career as a freelancer. So I realize that this may be a little bit controversial, but I personally very strongly believe that, at least in my line of work, charging hourly is death to a freelancer. When I first got started, I would get on the phone with prospective clients and they would ask me, what's your hourly rate? Because that's just what everyone asks. And so I naively assumed that was just how things were done and it was the only option. And when I started out, I made pretty little income because of that. And I quickly realized that in order to actually scale my business and charge what my services are worth, I had to move away from hourly. So for the most part, I charge a monthly retainer. Most of my clients are ongoing. Occasionally, I will do a one-time project-based fee if it's a fixed scope project instead of ongoing work. But I do still have clients who ask why I don't charge hourly. And so usually the way I explain it is, and I think Alexandra, I had told you this story when we chatted, there's a behavioral economics expert named Dan Ariely. He's the author of Predictably Irrational. And he has this great example. He says, let's say you get locked out of your house and you have to call a locksmith. And scenario A, the locksmith comes and he fiddles with the lock for a while and he tries all these different tools. And finally, he opens the door for you. and you think, wow, he put so much time and effort into this, I better tip him really well, right? In scenario B, the locksmith comes, he's really well trained, he's been doing this for a while, he knows exactly what tool to use, so he opens the door really quickly and you get in right away. And you think, oh, he didn't spend that much time on it, I'll just give him a small tip. But this is actually a complete logical fallacy, because your goal is actually to get into your home as fast as you possibly can, right? So you should be tipping, you should want locksmith B. You should want that faster, more efficient situation. But we have this crazy notion that the amount of time that you put into something reflects how valuable it is and how much value you're providing by doing that thing. And that's just simply not true. And so when it comes to my clients, I'm sort of the quote unquote experienced locksmith in this scenario. And the way that I explain it to them is, look, you could hire somebody to do this hourly and you could pay them 3 times as much to take 3 times as long to get to the right results that you're looking for. Or you can hire me to do it well from the start and really leverage the experience that I have and get you to the results that you need faster. So that's typically how I think about it.
That is such a great example. You are teaching us all. Can we just go down the line quickly, just out of curiosity, pricing structure for each of you? Does it vary, Alice?
Whoop, I was muted, sorry.
Okay.
Yeah, it does for me. And I think that I'm willing to adjust a little bit depending on what individual organizations need. But I agree with Sarah that I prefer to work on a project-based kind of pay scale instead of hourly, or often as a writer, and particularly as an editor, when I do editing work, I'll run into people wanting to do per word, which I understand why, because I think, unlike it sounds like what Sarah's doing, I'm working on pretty finite projects usually. Rarely is it something that's ongoing for 6 months or a year or anything. But yeah, I think when you narrow yourself to hourly, as you become more skilled and more experienced, your pay doesn't reflect that, because you're doing things more quickly, more efficiently, and so you're actually getting paid less for the same amount of work, even though you're getting better. So I think Sarah's absolutely right that you should charge for the value you're providing, not for the time that you're providing.
Right. Any other things to add on pricing structure, Stacy or Mitra?
I would say just from the event scope that when you're starting out, if you can kind of figure out what it is that you need, whether it is just to make ends meet, then you can kind of backtrack and set that idea. So even if, as Sarah's saying, not necessarily to charge hourly, to figure out what you would need hourly to kind of make all of your ends meet, and then you have a base to kind of do the rest of that math, whether that's an individual project. So for me, if it's an event, if it's an individual project, sure. Yeah, I can kind of know if it's going to take me 100 hours, and then I can give that flat rate fee, because as everybody mentioned, if I'm better at what I'm doing, it's happening faster. So I don't really want to charge hourly. Plus, other things are going to come up that's going to take your time, and you'd like to get what it is that you think you're worth. But and also to come up with kind of what you're willing to accept. If you know that you're going to get some referrals from friends and family, are you willing to give a discount, and what would that be? If you're going to get, and as Alice mentioned, if you're going to work with not-for-profits or organizations that you may have to kind of tweak something because you feel in your heart you want to work with them, do you have a not-for-profit price? Do you have a salary that you can automatically say, sure, this is what I can do for you? And you figure that out kind of already, what you're willing to accept, so that you don't have to sit and redo that structure every single time, and you can come up with that. But and especially if it's something creative, how long is it going to take you to do it? Obviously, we hope we get better, but if it's a creative project, how much of that can you handle in a day? Can Alice and I really create something from the heart, really, really well written 5 times a day, or can you only really do that once? So if you're only going to do it once, how long is that going to take, and how much do you need to be able to make? So at the end of the day, whether you have a partner, as she and I are both lucky enough to be able to say we're not going to starve, but at the end of the day, can you keep yourself safe, healthy, happy, filled with passion?
Right.
Whether it's able to go to yoga or able to feed your kids, whatever, or both, whatever that is.
All important.
Yeah, all important. Will it work? You only have a couple of things as a freelancer. It's your abilities and your time. You should be able to get what it is that you think you're worth, or at least grow into that in the process.
Right.
And I would just super quickly add, Stacy, you said something that really sparked with me, because as creative people, as creative professionals, most of the work we do is in our heads. Actually putting it on the page is such a small percentage of the work, and it's difficult to explain to a client, no, I'm charging you for the hours I was thinking. That's a really hard thing to define, right? So if you do more project-based billing, then that thinking is kind of wrapped into there, and you don't have to do so much trying to explain, no, really, I thought about this article for 5 hours. That's why I'm billing you.
Right. No, that's a great point.
Yeah.
Just from the production aspect, like kind of a different kind of work, I think hourly or day rate is actually very important, depending on what kind of work you're doing. Like production, like you need to be paid for that time that you are doing the thing. And sometimes that thing takes way longer than anyone thinks it's going to take. I primarily function on day rates. Occasionally I'll do project rates, but I frequently end up kind of shooting myself in the foot when I take project rates, because the clients sometimes make it sound so easy. They're like NBD, but then they're super disorganized, and like things get shifted in this way, and all these things end up getting lost in translation and getting slowed down. And I'm kind of like stuck in between this project and that is my time, and if I'm just like waiting.
It sounds like, so pricing structure is really dependent on what is going to protect you as a freelancer, whether that's the unknown hours, maybe it's taking you less hours than someone thinks it will, or more hours, and then kind of work backwards from there to see what makes the most sense. In terms of protecting yourself, just quickly, we do have just a time check, about 15 minutes left, and we're starting to get a couple questions in. So our hour is going fast. But let's talk about contracts for a second. So Sarah, I want to go to you with this one. How important is having a solid contract with a client? Who helped you create yours? What safeguards should you be really putting into place to make sure you're getting the money that people said that they'd pay you?
Yeah, no, a contract is a really important thing to have down. The way that I approached it, I actually found a template online, and I sort of manipulated it a little bit to reflect what I thought I needed to get started. But then it's really been a gradual process over the last few years of just refining it as I've learned lessons, and some have definitely been learned the hard way. So I had one client who refused to pay me after I had delivered the work. And after that, I decided to switch to a prepayment model. So now all of my clients pay in advance. And, especially nowadays when everything's online, it's really hard to maintain full control over the deliverables that you're creating if the client doesn't pay you, right? And so if you are a designer and they've already saved your design file, or you have written materials that they've copy and pasted, or in my case, if you've already created ads in their Facebook account and they have access to those, it's really hard to retract that work if they don't pay you. So I've found that the best solution is just to have them pay up front, so that you have that guarantee and that control to stop doing the work if they do, for whatever reason, stop paying you.
Right.
And the other thing is, in my contract, I always enforce a 14 days notice to cancel policy, and that's from either side. So for me, that's basically so that my clients can't just email me out of the blue one day and say, okay, we're done, bye, thanks a lot. And then I have the time to replace the income if I need to. And the way that I pitch it to them is it's actually in their best interest, because if conversely, I'm the one who says, I'm sorry, we can't continue working together for whatever reason, then they have the time to replace me.
Great. Mitra, is this something else that you feel comfortable asking people? Hey, can I see your contract?
This is not my realm. I'm really disorganized, I'll say.
No, that's fair. That's fair. And I think it's something that a lot of people do struggle with. So getting templates, talking with, potentially a lawyer, a friend, and seeing, again, what is going to be the best way that you can protect yourself.
I've honestly, hearing Sarah say that she is the one that provides the contracts is like, you just blew my mind. Like, why don't I have contracts? I just wait for people to give me contracts, but like, I should give them contracts. That makes so much sense. I don't even know why. It never even occurred to me.
We're learning from each other. This is what it's all about, you guys. So moving on to branding and marketing, we'll kind of go through this quickly. Again, we have 10 minutes left, and this is such good content. Alice, this one's back to you. How did you identify your niche when you were just starting out? Again, you had been in the industry for a while, but going to be a freelancer, how did you identify what that was and then communicate it to potential clients?
I'm actually going to kind of turn your question on its head because, and this is a little bit the opposite of what Sarah has experienced, I think. But I think my greatest asset as a freelancer has been that I have an extremely broad, experience in writing. I've edited, I've been a copywriter, I've been a managing editor, I've been a staff writer, I've worked in agencies, I've worked in-house, I've worked for nonprofit organizations, I've worked in multiple countries. And so I think for me, a little counterintuitively, my niche, if there is one, is that I can take pieces of that broad experience and bring it to whatever the job I need to do happens to be in that moment. And now, granted, a lot of that experience, like I said, is in the advocacy world. So that, kind of ties everything together. But I was recently talking to a friend who's just starting to freelance and was saying, don't be afraid to own all of your experience, even if it seems a little bit unconnected or disjointed. I think that often people who end up freelancing are people who are flexible people and people who try new things, and using that variety of knowledge and skill and being able to, I guess, puzzle piece together which parts of that experience are best for any given client, any given job. I think that's extremely important when you're trying to find your place.
I was muted. So many of you talked about that in our initial conversations that we had about being very specific, personable, human, and mentioning that you're serving a very specific unmet need of whatever that client is. And so making it feel very tailored and personalized to their needs. So I think you spoke to that beautifully. The other question I have, and Sarah, this is going back to you. What's in a name? So when marketing your services to potential clients and when finding people for this panel, not everyone's willing to call themselves a freelancer. I'm a consultant, I'm a small business owner, I'm an entrepreneur, I'm a contractor. How important is what you call yourself, and how might that affect your price point? We always come back to money.
Yeah, it's a really good question. And to be honest, it's something that I still grapple with myself because there are so many different terms for what we do. In general, I prefer to describe myself as a consultant. I think generally the term freelancer sort of elicits this idea that you're working hour to hour and providing a skill in a very competitive market, right? We sort of jump right to those freelance marketplaces in our minds, I think. And I think the term freelancer, you think of somebody who's filling a need, filling a gap in the organization. But when you say consultant, people tend to think of somebody who has a lot of business expertise, who's coming in to provide direction and advise the company. And so what's tricky to me is that I am a freelancer because I do work independently with my own clients, and I offer services at my own rates, but I'm doing it with the approach of a consultant. So I'm not here to have you tell me what it is you need from me and then just hand that over to you. I'm here to tell you that, given your marketing funnel, given the results that you've seen to date, given your budget, that this is what we need to be doing in order to see improvement. And then I'm going to go help you do that. So it is sort of a hybrid role. And sometimes I'm not doing any implementation and it is purely just strategy work, and then the client will implement themselves, in which case it is more of a traditional consulting role. but I think it's up to you what you call yourself. It's whatever you're comfortable with. And if you do strictly focus on implementation, then by all means, call yourself a freelancer. And I think just own that term. I would love to see a shift toward businesses thinking about freelancers in a different sense, more in that, empowerment consulting type of role. And for freelancers to also start giving themselves that empowerment to really make progress in that direction. Great points. So speaking of freelancers banding together and supporting each other and empowering one another, I want to talk a little bit about squad goals before getting to the Q&A. How important is it to have a group of advisors, a network of people helping you, and how do you find these people? So Stacy, this one's for you. How did you build your squad?
I think it's really important to find that tribe, and I think it really matters. And I think if you're lucky enough to pull some people in, you're lucky enough. I think some of it, more like what Alice was saying, that my experience is so varied that today what I'm trying to do is just meet those needs and find those pieces of myself that work in whatever that situation is and to draw upon those. So I think it's really important. I think today you can kind of search out people online, find Facebook groups in whatever it is that you're doing, things that you might be interested in, things that you might not even know that you're interested in, but find people who are maybe more experienced than you. They've tackled these problems. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. They can guide you a little bit. One way I found was when I was starting my blog, I interviewed other travelers that were location independent or were in process of being a digital nomad, of whatever that meant to them, or those that took their education out of the classroom, or those that started writing and had no writing degree, but all of a sudden they have a 6-figure income or a limited income, but they're passion-filled and love what they do and can go to all the places that they feel but still eat. And I think some of those organizations are available, whether it's a local council, a local university. There's tons of free stuff out there. And there's lots of people who would love to just be a part of your story. Maybe it's an editor that you've worked with before or a client you've worked with before that you just really connected with. And somehow, whether it's over coffee or over your consulting conversation, these other things kind of just take hold. But knowing that there's someone just like you have a best friend that you can call at any hour and vent. The freelancer consulting life is different, especially like Alice and I went from surrounded by lots of people to maybe not surrounded by too many other people. So whether you're looking for that high five because you feel like you really accomplished something, or you're having a miserable day, there's nobody around to kind of pull you out of that or go for coffee and buy you a cupcake. So whatever it is that you need, you kind of have to source that out yourself and figure out what that is. But they're there. You just have to look for them. But they're really necessary, and you almost didn't know how necessary until you find them.
Great. And I want to go to Mitra as well. This is kind of the last official question before going into the Q&A. I think we've touched a lot on pros and cons, but certainly if we want to stick around for a couple more minutes, we can get to that. Mitra, I loved the conversation we had about your approach to networking. And I think it's direct, but it's also all about flattery. So can you tell me about how you reach out to folks that you find interesting and how you start building those relationships?
I just sometimes shoot people an email asking what they're working on, or I heard you're doing this. That sounds really great. Can we talk? And like that comes from a genuine place of curiosity. I'm always, I feel like radio and podcasting is quite supportive. It's kind of like, what's the phrase, like the tide rise, all boats rise with the tide or whatever. Mm-hmm. So everyone's kind of really eager to help each other, and it's pretty friendly, and it doesn't feel super competitive in like a gross way or anything. And I genuinely want to know how people are doing, especially if they're starting their own businesses, like how that's going, how are they managing that? That's something I'm interested in. I would like to maybe one day run a production company, but I don't know how. you know? So I emailed so-and-so who just started one and was like, that's cool. Can we talk about it? And, you know, people say yes if they have time, you know, sometimes they don't, no big deal. Also, you know, referrals, like friends will happily introduce you to other friends. I'm constantly referring people who are less experienced than me when I can't take on jobs, just constantly. I know tons of people who need work when I can't take on work, and I'm happy to give anyone a reference, and people will do that for you as well.
Great. So it is actually 8:00 Eastern time. So we are pretty much coming to our end. If my lovely panelists wouldn't mind sticking around for a couple more minutes to address some of our Q&A, you guys can give me the thumbs up if you're good to stick around. If not, I can, all good, all thumbs up. Wonderful. Okay. So let's bust into the Q&A, and then I'll give you an opportunity to share some final thoughts as well. First question, I think this would probably be most relevant for Sarah. How do you handle non-disclosure agreements or non-compete clauses, particularly when you're leaving an industry and a company where you have client relationships already and moving to working for yourself?
Yeah, so for me, I'm always a little bit hesitant to sign NDAs. I do have some clients who are on the larger side and are very used to sort of a standard corporate process when they bring folks on. And so usually if they send an NDA, I'll actually push back and I'll just say, you know, I don't typically sign these. I'm curious if there's something in particular that you're concerned about. And if they come back and they say it's really important that you sign it, then I'll consider it. And with the non-compete clauses, I draw a hard line there. That's a deal breaker for me. I tell my client, look, I am a freelancer, and as you can imagine, I want to keep the door open to as many opportunities as I can. I am happy to let you know if I end up taking on a project with your competitor. It's very unlikely that I would, but I don't agree to those clauses as a consultant.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
This question is for all of you. And if you want to respond, just show a little raised hand. Did you incorporate, like, did you become an LLC when you decided to go to work for yourself? Mitra.
I actually am in the process of incorporating, but not as an LLC. I'm turning myself into an S Corp, which is more, it's easier to, it's more of like a tax bracket than like an actual company. Mm-hmm. And so it doesn't have like the liability protections. I'm considering maybe just going all the way and becoming an LLC. But I've been freelancing for a really long time without this. And I think now, especially with the new like tax laws, my accountant kind of advised me that it would be in my best interest if I kind of formalized my process a little bit, and I could save some money when it comes to tax time, basically, because I'm shelling out quite a lot for taxes.
Fair enough. Anyone else on that front?
I'll volunteer my experience, but I would also love to hear what Stacy has run into, since we're both kind of jumping around different countries. I have not done any of that because I am not a U.S. resident legally, and so it is limited what I can do. And if I were to do any of those things, which would require me to maintain residency in a state somewhere, it would be a huge tax burden. So it's something I worry about, and I've considered carrying insurance. I mean, I feel like I work in a fairly low risk kind of field, but I would love to hear, Stacy, how you've handled that as well, because it's a constant thorn in my side.
It is. Same for the writing perspective. I also considered it kind of low risk. On the event perspective, depending on what it is, it could certainly hold a bit of liability depending on what you're doing. I haven't yet. I've considered it a lot. I am a U.S. resident presently, but I never know what the future will hold. So I've kicked around a little bit. There are some states that you can kind of incorporate in, but you don't have to live in. But I haven't fully researched yet. enough to make me secure enough to even leave, what that would mean if we do leave the country at a later date. And that would mean that I would have to kind of take that away, or what that tax burden is with the new tax laws, however long they remain in play, for U.S. residents living outside of the U.S. So we haven't taken the leap just yet, but it is something that I've kicked around, like Mitra mentioned, whether it's an S Corp or an LLC, but how does that kind of play? Or would it just make more sense to kind of handle or have liability insurance for an extended period of time, whatever that is, but when I don't know exactly what's coming, what will take place, or in what amount of time that will be, if it's worth it or if it's not. But not everything manages internationally as well as we would like them to be, or the tax burden might be a little bit more difficult than you'd think it would be.
That totally makes sense. So last question before we wrap up here, and you all can share your kind of final thoughts. Have any of you used the services of an employment lawyer, whether related to reviewing a contract or anything like that? Anyone?
I actually just hired an entertainment lawyer because, prior to, me becoming an S Corp, I did run a little business. And so I'm slowly kind of becoming more savvy when it comes to contracts and things like that. And I think it's time that I'm at a level now where I need to kind of formalize my business in certain ways. And there's frankly things I don't know how to do, like manage contracts. So, I'm kind of taking that leap and using professional services more frequently now.
Great. And you had also mentioned a really great point when we were talking before too. I was just like, what free or low cost resources or what things can you barter for? And you're like, I firmly believe in paying people for what they're giving me. And I think that was such a perfect freelancer answer. You're like, this is the industry I'm in. People need to be paid for what they offer.
They need to be paid. And when you're like, someone's doing favors for someone, resentments grow very fast. Like you're not going to get the quality of the work that you need because people are like, oh, well, I'm not really paying them. I'm just doing them a favor, like pay for it. When you get to that level, pay for it.
That's a great point. So, wrapping up here, ladies, pros and cons. We talked about a number of them. Pros, flex schedule. You're working and living all around the world. Great work-life balance, I would assume. Cons, potential lack of built-in social life, maybe feeling a bit isolated. Healthcare costs, certainly ups and downs in the market. Anything you have to add to conclude with tonight of, advice or thoughts on people who are considering this as their next career move? I'll just take a show of hands here for who would like to start. Sarah.
So I'll start off with the cons, which I'd probably prefer to call challenges. I think for me, the biggest one is definitely the feelings of loneliness that come with working totally by yourself, because you have these really long days where you're just in your apartment alone or in a coffee shop and everybody has their earbuds in and you're not really talking to anybody. And you realize that part of the upside of having a full-time sort of standard office job is that you do have that built-in environment of your coworkers and you get to know each other and you have coffee breaks together. So I definitely feel a lack of that. I do have a couple of friends in the area who also freelance, and so we make a point of it to once in a while even just work from the same
play dates.
Yeah, like work dates. So that's been helpful to an extent. But there are so many pros to this lifestyle. And I've been absolutely soaking it up for the last 3 years. My fiance, because he also freelances, we're able to travel a lot. So last winter, we actually decided that we didn't want to be in Boston for another really harsh winter. And so we moved to Thailand for 3 months and we worked from there. And that was a phenomenal experience. And I think even the lifestyle stuff aside, just looking at the work aspects specifically, as a freelancer, you have the autonomy to decide who you're working with, what kinds of projects you're working on, how much you're charging, where you're working from, when you're working. And that really does tie into the lifestyle aspect as well. And so the lines are a little bit blurry, but I think that for me, that's definitely been a pro.
Awesome. Alice, back to you.
Yeah, I mean, I would echo a lot of Sarah, what you just said. I think for me, particularly because I've been bouncing around different continents, maybe the isolation is definitely the biggest challenge for me. But I would recommend it to anyone. I really would. I think that it's an amazing opportunity to be able to follow your passions, do the work you believe in, and simultaneously have the flexibility to discover things that maybe you didn't even know were for you, to see new places. Like Sarah said, moving to Thailand, I probably travel at least once a month, and I have worked from jungles, I have worked from boats, I have worked in some really strange places. And I think that at the end of the day, for all of the struggles you may face with taxes or feeling a little bit of alone, I think that it's an open door that more people should walk through.
Cool.
I think I would agree. And that 3-month scenario is kind of what brought us to San Diego. We wanted to ditch a New York winter and thought we were going to be here for 3 months. It's been 3.5 years. There's the ability to kind of grab that sunshine more often and follow those passions, whatever they may be, I think are beyond words, absolutely worthwhile. I think for me, some of the cons or challenges, because it was that shift, is building that new group of whether it's clients or people who kind of know who you are, and also shifting that focus for all the people who already know who you are and perhaps might have this box that you fit into. If they can't transition out of that box, or they or conceptually don't see the bigger picture of what you might be able to offer, it provides a little bit of challenges that you need to and hurdles for you to jump over to kind of recraft and rebrand yourself, to figure out how you can merge all those different pieces of you into something that you can explain in an elevator pitch or a lift pitch, wherever you may be in the world. But I think that the pros, without question, outweigh the cons. And for us, that travel perspective and that ability to jump around, I couldn't have done that if I was still teaching in the traditional sense that I was. But there are so many ways to take what you know and put it in a different perspective, in a different way, in a different spot today, certainly, even differently than it was 15 years ago. It's mind-blowing and absolutely worthwhile.
Wonderful. And Mitra, finally to you.
Like what everyone is saying, I love the flexibility. I travel a ton. On the flip side of that, like I end up going on vacations that are workcations, and so I never really get to fully get away from work, because sometimes it's feast and famine, it's unpredictable, and those are things to consider, but at the end of the day, I like that I get to work on my own terms. And I get to choose who I work for, and I get to put a value on myself. And, I don't have to be in an office and interact with people that I don't want to interact with, or have those kind of tense dynamic exchanges that happen in work environments that you can't really control. I feel a large degree of control over my life, which is something I really, really enjoy.
Awesome. Well, thank you all so much. I think you've given people so much to think about, so many considerations. You've all come at this from different angles and operate within different marketplaces. So I really appreciate you coming and being so open and honest about your own experiences, because that's how we all learn, right? So again, thank you to our 4 wonderful panelists, Alice, Stacy, Sarah, Mitra. You guys have been great. For all of our listeners, thank you for sticking with us a few minutes after 8 o'clock. Please take our satisfaction survey. Let us know how we did. Like I said, this is the first time we're experimenting with webcam plus screen share, so always want to hear your thoughts, and we can share those with our panelists as well. catch up on any webinars you may have missed over the course of the year. We host one a month. They're free of charge for all Brandeis alumni and the full Brandeis community. And live webinars are going to be resuming in September. We have a really great series planned for you. For those of you who are thinking about a career shift, and I assume that's why you're here tonight, undergraduate students and alumni do get access to free career services for life through the Hiatt Career Center, and that includes one-on-one career coaching. So it might be a great place to start discussing these many decision-making factors with one of our career advisors. I'll also leave you with my contact information as well. It was a pleasure spending the last hour and 15 minutes with you wonderful ladies, and thank you so much again for sharing your experience with Brandeis folks.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Good night.